Welcome back. Canada's correctional investigator is raising concerns over the use of pepper spray in federal prisons. According to a new report, the use of pepper spray has tripled since 2011, making it the weapon of choice in 60% of incidents involving correctional officers last year. Correctional investigator of Canada, Howard Sapers, says existing policy gives officers too much discretion over when and how to use the weapon with minimal reporting requirements. Sapers' report also includes 27 recommendations to address inmate health, death behind bars, and conditions impacting Indigenous female inmates. Keith, to you first this time. How do you feel about the use of pepper spray to control inmates?
Well, I think I'd rather be pepper sprayed than bashed over the head with a billy club or something like that.
Is that what it used to be?
That's the kind of thing it used to be. And listen, I think Howard is out to lunch when he talks about, we just need to have a little time out here and we'll go and get permission from somebody and then we'll resume our discussion. Frankly, we're asking jail guards to do impossible jobs most of the time and work with very, very difficult clients in hopeless situations. They're not being very cooperative. They got little interest in being cooperative. So I'm not surprised that there are a lot of incidents. I think pepper spray, yes, it's a weapon. Yes, you need to be documenting that use. You need to be able to justify the use. But I think this idea of some kind of pause while we consider what we should do next when people are being beaten or hit or you're trying to intervene to save a life, I think those sorts of situations, the use of pepper spray is very justified and least harmful kind of intervention.
Greg, why do you feel pepper spray has become the tool of choice?
Well, I think it's a general human reaction to move to the path of least resistance, and as police officers and correction officers get more and more tools at their disposal in order to deal with people. We call them less lethal tools, pepper spray, tasers. They're going to basically take or choose the weapon that's going to offer them the best success with the least amount of effort. And initially we had police officers that, as Keith said, if you look 40 years back, they had those, 2-foot mag lights that they used to whack guys over the head with. And then they got equipped with tasers, and we went through a taser phase with which, lots of guys were getting tasered, but they came up with problems with those because people were dying. And then so they've now moved to pepper spray. So I think pepper spray meets a balance between a safe response for individuals who are on the receiving end and a convenient response for guys who are using it.
Kevin, of the concerns raised by Howard Sapers, what stands out most for you?
Well, to have a spike like this in usage, and it's only in the last few years that this spike has occurred. Pepper spray has been around for quite a while, so it's not like guards which have just been given a new tool to use. And it seems that because of the lack of accountability, they seem to be resorting to what amounts to violence on prisoners a lot more than perhaps they should be. And I think there should be accountability so that the guards don't use pepper spray as a convenient way of, punishing prisoners who get a little out of line. And I think the problem there is that because it's viewed as a lot less injurious than a baton, for example, that it's much more quickly resorted to, and that's pretty concerning.
So amp up the degree of accountability then.
Yeah, there should be an accountability every time violence is resorted to, and the investigator seems to indicate that accountability isn't there, and I think it should be.
Okay. As Canada's prison population continues to rise, some are looking at new ways to keep repeat offenders from returning to life behind bars. One of those suggestions is the use of more mental health courts, a concept first established in Toronto back in 1998 to help offenders with mental illness to spend less time in pretrial custody and more time focused on receiving treatment. Greg, some estimates suggest up to 35% of federal inmates suffer from psychological disorders. By that measure, what's your perspective on the need for mental health courts in Alberta?
Well, we don't have them at the moment. But over the last decade, the criminal justice system across the country has been moving towards more specialized courts. So we got specialized courts for drugs, we got specialized courts now for domestic violence, specialized courts for mental health issues. And in Alberta, we have a program called the Mental Health Diversion Program, which isn't a specialized court in and of itself, but what it does is it seeks to screen individuals charged with a myriad of offenses for mental health issues and divert them out of the particular system, out of the criminal justice system. I think it's useful. I think it can tend to address issues that are mental health related. I mean, we overlook that a large proportion of people that are incarcerated are dealing with mental health issues. Now, on the flip side, there's going to be a pushback from individuals that feel that diverting them out of the criminal justice system it essentially absolves them from liability. It reduces denunciation and deterrence, which are other sentencing factors. So there's two big schools of thought on this. One deals with rehabilitation of offenders, which these specialized courts tend to address very well, and another one is the denunciation and deterrence aspect of the criminal justice system, which the specialized courts tend to skirt around.
Well, and Kevin, what's your take on the perspective that specialized courts allow the system to go easy on offenders and that maybe victims of crime are not respected?
Well, far too many people think that mental health is sort of pseudoscience, and that a lot of these people are just faking to avoid the consequences of their actions. But the psychologists and psychiatrists who examine these patients who do get the treatment necessary while they're within the criminal justice system aren't fools, and they know when they're being hoodwinked and when they're not. Far too often people think that, for example, the concept of not criminally responsible by reason of a mental disorder. Most people think that that's a joke, that killers can be sent to a mental hospital for treatment rather than serving the rest of their lives behind bars. Well, these people aren't killers per se because their actions aren't voluntary. Their mental illness forces them to do things that they wouldn't normally do. And if they can be treated, and most can, then they should be treated. They shouldn't be treated like criminals. I mean, it's like if you were driving down a highway and your brakes failed and you had an accident and killed someone. You wouldn't be at fault any more than someone whose brain malfunctions and causes them to commit something that is otherwise heinous.
Now, Canada has been slow to adopt this system, but there are hundreds of mental health courts south of the border, and a 2007 study showed that recidivism rates among offenders going through mental health court dropped by 26%, and the likelihood of committing a violent crime dropped 55% when compared to other offenders. Keith, what would it take to create and support mental health courts here in this province?
Would take a lot of expenditure in appointing judges and support people, and maybe dredging up more psychiatrists and psychologists and all that. But however much money it cost, it probably would save money in the long term. But I just want to add another perspective to this, and that is a lot of inmates don't want to be defined as mentally ill, sent to a mental hospital, because that is a permanent stigma. They'd rather be labeled as a criminal than crazy, because if you've been through the mental health system, that's a permanent stigma. You've been through the criminal justice system, it isn't the same negative stigma as a lot of these inmates look at the mental health side of it. So it's an interesting kind of issue, and I'm aware of a couple of cases where people that were convicted under a mental health sort of legislation then are saying, well, I really wasn't crazy, I was just bad. And in our way of thinking in society, somehow mental illness is almost more stigmatizing than criminal behavior is. So you do get accused who fight against being processed through the mental health route, and then you also get ones that want to be. So it's just an interesting issue about the long-term consequences of those kinds of labels for offenders.
An interesting discussion. Gentlemen, appreciate your perspectives as always.